Mae ting dda ddod agus fáilte arás gan vlog agam seo an Còig of video de meise a freckers den question a hec Quora me yin Scottish Gaelic agus yin a Gaelic te me got smisha Good morning everyone and welcome back to my vlog, or welcome if you're new. Feel free to like, subscribe, all that other stuff. I'm now saying without tripping over my words, so progress as a YouTuber. I'm Rachel, I'm not sure if I've already said that, and this is the 5th video of me answering the questions that Quora has about Scottish Gaelic. And as always, the disclaimer, if you're a Gaelic speaker, there's a lot of ignorance and opinions that you do not want to read in the questions and in the answers to the questions, so don't go searching this up unless you're feeling particularly emotionally strong, because you don't need that sort of stuff in your life when you're seeing it and hearing it all the time anyway, unsolicited. So, first question for today. What is the difference between is-measure and ha-measure in Scottish Gaelic? And it gives an example in the question. Basically this question, and I gather this is a question from a learner, why they're asking it on Quora and not the teacher or a Learning Gaelic Facebook group or something, is beyond me, but this comes from the fact that is and ha both translate in English as be or is or are, or English, don't ask me about English. Gaelic is not the only language that has two verbs that translate as to be in English, and Spanish does. The distinction is not the same as Spanish. And I'm not the best at grammar, so check with someone else before you take my word as absolute gospel. But basically the difference is that is a copula, so it links two nouns to each other. So is measure rönich. Es is I am, and measure, me, this is a pronoun, so it's a noun, and rönich is my name, so it's also a noun. So it links two nouns to each other. Ha usually links a noun with something else. So es measure trank, I am busy. So measure is a noun and trank is an adjective. So yeah, that's the difference. And the example given is is-measure mór and ha-measure mór. And of course, is-measure mór will then be ungrammatical. You could say, Sam mór ha-me. So yeah, that's that. Good question. I mean, not the right place to be asking it, but, you know, better question than some of the others that have been. Keshjara and you, second question today. Which Celtic language should I learn? Irish, Welsh, or Scottish Gaelic? I don't know you, so this depends. I assume if you're on my channel, you're probably interested in learning Scottish Gaelic. At first, I should say these are not the only options. There's Breton, there's Manx, and there's Cornish. Personally, I find Cornish to be a very user-friendly language, and the fact that I don't speak it is entirely due to my own laziness. But I would say, what language do you have most of a connection to? Does anyone in your family speak one of them? Does anyone in your near vicinity speak one of them? Do you live in an area that traditionally speaks one of these languages? Or do you have grandparents or great-grandparents who came from an area that traditionally speaks one of these languages? If yes to any of those, go for the language that has that personal connection to you. If not, pick one that you'll use or has the most opportunities for use. So if you're in not a Celtic language speaking region and you do not have heritage from a Celtic language speaking region and for some reason you want to learn a Celtic language, then I would say find out what classes are near you, or find out what community groups for that language are near you, and pick the one that's easiest to get to and you have the most opportunity to speak and attend and that sort of stuff. So yeah, first you've got 6 options, not just 3, and yeah, basically pick ones that you either have the closest connection to or will have the most opportunity to use. Kesh 3. Die Scottish Gaelic is just 3 inis. Why did they try to stop the Scottish Welsh and Irish speaking their own language then? Not sure why there's a then at the end of this sentence. And again, I would add the Bretons and the Cornish here. I'm not sure what the situation was in the Isle of Man, actually. So why did they try to stop us speaking our own language? Colonization? I don't necessarily know all the details. I certainly don't know what was going through the minds of people who put various policies in place that that worked to suppress the language in various ways. I can hazard a guess that some of it was colonization. Obviously, it was all colonization, but some of it was fear of the unknown. Some of it, and this is, I think, the main reason people hate on the languages today, is because they feel very intimidated by there being something being spoken around them that they can't understand. Particularly being spoken around them that they can't understand from people who might look like them. I don't know if that makes it more or less scary in the minds of racist people. Also, back in the day, you see a lot of Victorian information about other cultures that believes in a sort of racial hierarchy or a cultural hierarchy. Basically, this idea that they had that urbanized people are somehow more involved than agricultural people, somehow more evolved than hunter-gatherer people. This isn't true. Like, every culture is suited to the environment it's in. But this hierarchy extends to race and to language. There's a lot of really racist sort of sketches, information that you can find comparing Irish people to apes and stuff like that from the Victorian era. So I think to some extent there was this thought of, if we can make people speak English and not a Celtic language, it will civilise them. Which is, I mean, as I've mentioned, as you can hear, I'm Australian. And this is very much the mentality that the English had coming into Australia, that English-speaking colonisers had coming into Australia when they encountered Indigenous Australians. They thought that they could be civilised and that the English language is a main vehicle of civilization. If people learn to speak English, then they will join this civilized culture, which is all sorts of biased and incorrect and so on. But that would certainly be a factor in why different policies were put in place and different social pressures and mentalities were present, telling people to stop speaking Gaelic and Irish and Welsh and other languages. And as I mentioned already, the fear of the unknown. There is a lot of evidence. I read something on Twitter. I keep mentioning I read something on Twitter the other day about, like, surprisingly recently in Ireland. I don't know, probably not surprising to people who lived through the last century. People, Irish speakers, being put in prison. I read this one. I can't remember his name. Was put in prison in like the 70s or 80s for 6 months, purely for speaking Irish in public, by an English-speaking police officer who assumed that if you were speaking Irish in public, you were planning an act of terrorism. So I think there was a lot of fear from different colonizers that if people were speaking their own language amongst themselves, they must be somehow plotting against them. And, like, you see this, how many times do you read people saying, oh, I went on holiday in Wales and I walked into a pub and they were all speaking English until I walked in, and then they swapped to Welsh so I couldn't understand them to make me feel like the odd one out. Which is not the case. I would suggest that if you walk into a pub in Wales and everyone's speaking speaking Welsh when you walk in, they were speaking Welsh before you walked in, and they will be speaking Welsh after you leave. But there's this fear that if people are speaking a language you can't understand, they must somehow be talking about you or plotting against you. So I guess that's also part of the social pressure for why people were not discouraged from speaking their own language, and they discouraged in a way that, as I mentioned, people put in prison, people were beaten in schools. So, discouraged is a very light term, but I guess this is probably some of the reasoning that was going on, but I really don't know. I'm not in their heads. So, moving on to another question. This is Kesh, I believe. Is Gaelic Scottish or Irish? Yes. Gaelic, as I mentioned, is a broad term for a language. It basically means pertaining to the Gaels. And the Gaels, of course, are an ethnic cultural group. I use both ethnic and cultural because there are such a thing as Norse Gaels or Al Gael, which are, if you're being really focused on DNA and blood, are Norse genetically, but they took on the Gaelic culture a long time ago, and they're Gaels now. Like, you're not going to go up to someone called Soria MacLeod and tell them they're not a Gael, are you? Even though their entire name is Norse and they may have Norse ancestry, Anyway, so they're an ethno-cultural group that covers Ireland, the Isle of Man, and Scotland. And Gaelic, referring to the language that these people speak, is spoken in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. So in that sense, Gaelic is both Scottish and Irish. However, if you're pronouncing this word Gaelic, then that is Scottish, because the Irish do prefer that when you're speaking English, you call it Irish and not Gaelic. Ceist a Còig. What is a sporran in Gaelic? Now, sporran is the Gaelic word for a purse. So all these manly men who go around and say, "Oh yes, it's not a skirt, it's a kilt, and it's not a purse, it's a sporran." Yeah, sorry, but sporran literally just is purse. How do you say "just kidding" in Gaelic? Chanigsa, I would say "Hamidjira tarangasad," which is like I'm literally just pulling from you. But you would say "Hamidjira fialga," or you can say "Chaniel mi ach a tarangasad" or "Chaniel mi ach a fialga," which is more like "I'm just joking." So yeah, that's that. Next question. Where are we up to? Castashia, maybe? Is the Gaelic spoken in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada, and other parts of Canada the same Gaelic that is spoken in Scotland, or has it evolved into a separate branch of Gaelic? No, it hasn't evolved into a separate branch of Gaelic. Is it the same that is spoken in Scotland? Yes and no. I can't speak to other parts of Canada because I've not spent much time in them, but I've spent time in Cape Breton, and there are many different dialects spoken in Cape Breton, because they had this thing called chain migration, where basically over a period of time, basically an entire town from or region from Scotland would be transplanted to a town or a region in Cape Breton. So basically whole communities were picked up and transplanted in Cape Breton. So that each community continued speaking the Gaelic that they had spoken back in Scotland. And for various reasons, there was not too much intermingling. I was surprised when I was there at how little intermingling there is. Well, when I was there, I noticed between the different ethnic groups. There would be Acadians, which are French speakers, Gaels, Mi'kmaq, and English, which actually, do they say English? I think they say white, which doesn't refer to Gaels or Acadians. To them, it refers to Anglophones. And these four ethnic groups didn't really mix all that much. And to a certain extent, within these ethnic groups, different towns of Gaelic speakers didn't mix all that much. I heard some theories that this was a specific plot by white people to stop them from banding together and rising up. I don't know how much of that is true and how much of that is fear-mongering. But yeah, basically, these individual communities were transplanted from Scotland into Cape Breton and continued functioning as their own community, as their own dialect group for a couple of 100 years. So the situation today is, depending on which area of Cape Breton you're from, if you speak Gaelic, you will speak a different dialect to someone who's from a different area of Cape Breton. So if, broadly speaking, if you're from the North Shore, you tend to have more Lewis and Harris type Gaelic. Whereas if you're from Sheremach and Anish, you tend to have more Lochaber type Gaelic. I do recommend the website Untitled Chapter, which has little maps that show you where all the different communities came from and went to. But basically, yes, um, there are many different dialects still spoken in Cape Breton. So the question is it still the same Gaelic that is spoken in Scotland? Well, in Scotland, you have the same situation, more or less, where there are still many different dialects of Gaelic being spoken in Scotland. So there are some dialects that are spoken in Cape Breton that are no longer spoken in Scotland. Lochaber is often given as an example of that because that dialect grouping is one of the larger dialect groupings in Cape Breton. A lot of speakers have Lochaber descendant dialects or Lochaber features in their Gaelic, and there's no or almost no speakers of that Gaelic left in Scotland. I heard, oh, it's died out in Scotland, and then I looked it up and there were like 4 speakers left, but that was a few years ago, so I don't know exactly. But on the other hand, a close friend of mine speaks Lewis Gaelic. She's from the North Shore of Cape Breton, and she speaks Lewis Gaelic, which of course is still spoken in Lewis in Scotland as well. There are some differences. They will have different vocabulary, obviously different environmental needs, different cultural things to refer to, different things have happened over the last few thousand years. The Cape Bretons have a lot of vocabulary for snow and ice skating and mooses, and particularly in the North Shore, they have a lot of vocabulary around mining and heavy industry, which you don't have in Lewis. And amongst the young people, like different the influences on the Gaelic spoken by the young people is different in Cape Breton. You get a lot of words being borrowed from, I guess it's called like Valley Girl English. That's what it sounds like to me. Whereas in Scotland it will be borrowed from Scots. But yeah, there is as much difference between Cape Breton Gaelic or any dialect of Cape Breton Gaelic as there is between any dialect still within Scotland. So no, it's not evolved into a separate branch of Gaelic. It's not even homogenized into a single uniform thing. People say Cape Breton Gaelic like it's a single thing, and it's not. It's a whole array of different dialects that happen to be on the same island, and they're not all in Cape Breton either. Antigonish has a lot of Irish speakers too. Antigonish has a lot of Gaelic speakers too, and they're on the mainland. So I should finish. I should finish this. I should finish this video for today. But I will say, if you're interested in Cape Breton Gaelic, obviously I've mentioned Còig Gaelic on a previous video. Definitely, if you can, spend a weekend there. It's great. I thoroughly recommend it. They also have online courses, the AGA, which is great also. On YouTube, I recommend Ballan and Gale, the Highland Village Museum, has a lot of videos, and the YouTube channel Gaelic NS is great as well. Has a lot of information on both of those channels about local traditions to various bits of Cape Breton Island, and you can hear different speakers from different parts of Cape Breton Island. I also definitely recommend Untitled Chapter, which does label the dialect that the speaker is from, so and where they came from in Scotland, where their ancestors came from in Scotland, so you can see that as well. So they're all great places to learn more about Gaelic as it's spoken in Cape Breton. Sinné bhfuil manéis an dí agus hí mis bhla ana ceach céin. Tíir an dras de